What if I told you that you could go through your entire day without getting angry, frustrated, or bothered by anyone? What if I told you that the people who seem to push your buttons, the ones who trigger your worst reactions, could become completely powerless over your emotional state? Most people think anger and frustration are just natural reactions to difficult people and situations. They believe that when someone cuts them off in traffic, when their boss criticizes them unfairly, or when someone disrespects them, getting angry is inevitable. But they're wrong. The truth is, your emotional reactions are not controlled by other people. They're controlled by you. And once you understand the science behind emotional regulation and master the techniques I'm about to share with you, you'll never be at the mercy of other people's behavior again. By the end of this video, you'll have a complete system for maintaining emotional control in any situation. You'll understand why most people fail at emotional regulation, and you'll have the exact step-by-step process to stay calm, composed, and in control, no matter what anyone throws at you. Chapter 1. The 3 emotional traps that keep you reactive. Here's what most people don't understand about anger and frustration. It's not the situation that makes you angry. It's not the person that bothers you. It's the trap you fall into in your own mind. There are 3 deadly emotional traps that keep you reactive. And if you don't understand these traps, you'll remain at the mercy of every difficult person you encounter. The first trap is the personalization trap. This is when you take everything personally, when you interpret other people's actions as deliberate attacks on you. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and immediately you think they did it to disrespect you. Your colleague doesn't respond to your email quickly enough, and you assume they're ignoring you on purpose. Your friend cancels plans last minute, and you feel like they don't value your time. The personalization trap is devastating because it makes you the victim of everyone else's behavior. You're constantly scanning for signs that people are trying to hurt, disrespect, or dismiss you. And when your brain is looking for evidence that you're being attacked, it will find it everywhere. The reality is that most people's actions have absolutely nothing to do with you. That person who cut you off in traffic wasn't thinking about you at all. They were probably distracted, late for something important, or dealing with their own problems. Your colleague who didn't respond quickly might be overwhelmed with work, dealing with a family emergency, or simply prioritizing other tasks. When you fall into the personalization trap, you're essentially giving every person you encounter the power to control your emotional state. You're making their behavior about you when it almost never island. This trap keeps you in a constant state of defensiveness, always ready to be offended, always prepared to feel attacked. The second trap is the expectation trap. This is when you have rigid expectations about how people should behave, and you get angry or frustrated when they don't meet those expectations. You expect people to be on time, so you get furious when they're late. You expect people to be respectful, so you're outraged when they're rude. You expect people to think the way you think, so you're confused and annoyed when they don't. The expectation trap is particularly dangerous because it sets you up for constant disappointment. People are not going to behave the way you want them to behave. They're going to act according to their own values, priorities, and circumstances, not yours. When you have rigid expectations, you're essentially demanding that the world conform to your preferences. And when it doesn't, you suffer. Think about it this way. If you expect every person you meet to be kind, respectful, and considerate, you're going to be disappointed regularly. Some people are having bad days. Some people lack emotional intelligence. Some people have different cultural backgrounds or communication styles. Some people are dealing with stress, trauma, or personal problems that affect how they interact with others. When you release your expectations and accept that people are going to be exactly who they are, not who you want them to be, you free yourself from constant frustration. The third trap is the control trap. This is when you believe you can control or change other people's behavior through your emotional reactions. You think that if you get angry enough, people will realize they're wrong and change. You believe that if you express your frustration clearly enough, people will start behaving the way you want them to. The control trap is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology. People don't change because you're angry with them. In fact, they usually become more defensive and resistant when you react emotionally. Your anger doesn't teach them anything. Your frustration doesn't motivate them to improve. Your emotional reactions often make situations worse, not better. Here's the harsh reality. You cannot control other people. You cannot force them to be more respectful, more considerate, or more understanding. You cannot make them care about your feelings or priorities. The only thing you can control is your own response to their behavior. When you try to control others through emotional reactions, you're wasting your energy and setting yourself up for disappointment. These three traps work together to keep you in a cycle of reactivity. You personalize other people's behavior. You have expectations about how they should act, and you try to control them through your emotional responses. This combination is toxic because it makes you dependent on other people for your emotional well-being. It gives them power over your mood, your energy, and your peace of mind. The most successful people, the ones who seem unshakable and always composed, have learned to avoid these traps completely. They don't take things personally because they understand that other people's behavior is about them, not about you. They don't have rigid expectations because they accept that people are flawed and unpredictable. They don't try to control others because they focus their energy on what they can actually influence. Breaking free from these traps requires a fundamental shift in how you think about human behavior and emotional responsibility. It means accepting that you are not the center of other people's universe, that your expectations are not universal laws, and that your emotional reactions are not tools for changing others. Once you make this shift, you become emotionally independent. You stop being a victim of other people's moods and actions, and you start taking full responsibility for your own emotional state. Chapter 2. The Science of Emotional Hijacking. To understand how to never get angry or bothered by anyone, you need to understand what's happening in your brain when you have an emotional reaction. Most people think emotions just happen to them, like they're struck by lightning. But emotions are actually the result of specific neurological processes. And once you understand these processes, you can learn to control them. When something happens that your brain interprets as threatening, offensive, or frustrating, your amygdala, the alarm center of your brain, triggers what's called an emotional hijack. This happens in milliseconds, faster than your conscious mind can process. Your amygdala floods your system with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, preparing your body for fight, flight, or freeze. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, and your thinking becomes narrow and reactive. This emotional hijacking served our ancestors well when they faced physical threats like predators or enemies. The ability to react quickly without thinking could mean the difference between life and death. But in modern life, your brain can't tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and an annoying coworker. It treats social threats, perceived disrespect, and minor inconveniences as if they were life or death situations. Here's the critical part. During an emotional hijack, your prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of your brain, goes offline. This is why people say and do things they regret when they're angry. It's why smart, reasonable people can become irrational and destructive when they're emotionally triggered. Their higher-order thinking has been temporarily disabled by their primitive survival systems. The hijack typically lasts about 6 to 20 seconds for the initial chemical flood, but the effects can linger for hours. During this time, you're literally not thinking clearly. Your brain is focused on the perceived threat and generating responses based on emotion rather than logic. This is why it's almost impossible to reason with someone who's in the middle of an emotional reaction, and it's why your own decision-making becomes impaired when you're triggered. But here's what most people don't know. The emotional hijack is not inevitable. It's a process that can be interrupted and controlled. The key is understanding the warning signs and having strategies to intervene before the hijack takes complete control. The warning signs of emotional hijacking are both physical and mental. Physically, you might notice your heart rate increasing, your breathing becoming shallow, your muscles tensing, your face flushing, or your hands clenching. Mentally, you might notice your thoughts becoming rapid and negative, your focus narrowing to the source of irritation, or your inner voice becoming critical and aggressive. These warning signs are your opportunity to intervene. If you can catch the emotional hijack in its early stages, before the chemical flood reaches its peak, you can prevent it from taking control of your behavior. This is where the techniques I'll share later become crucial. Understanding the science also helps you depersonalize your emotional reactions. When you realize that anger and frustration are just neurochemical events in your brain, not fundamental truths about reality, you gain perspective. You start to see your emotions as temporary biological responses rather than accurate reflections of what's happening around you. This scientific understanding also explains why some people seem naturally calm, while others are easily triggered. It's not that calm people don't have amygdalas or don't experience stress. They've simply trained their brains to recognize emotional hijacking earlier and respond more effectively. They've strengthened their prefrontal cortex through practice and developed habits that prevent emotional reactions from escalating. The good news is that your brain is neuroplastic, meaning it can be rewired through practice. Every time you successfully interrupt an emotional hijack, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with emotional regulation. Every time you choose a calm response over a reactive one, you make it easier to choose calmness in the future. This is why emotional control gets easier with practice. Think of emotional regulation like physical fitness. Just as you can strengthen your muscles through exercise, you can strengthen your emotional control through practice. And just as physical fitness makes everyday activities easier, emotional fitness makes everyday interactions less stressful and more enjoyable. The people who never seem to get angry or bothered have essentially trained their brains to respond differently to triggers. They've created strong neural pathways for calmness and weak neural pathways for reactivity. They haven't eliminated their emotions, but they've learned to manage them effectively. This is important because many people think emotional control means becoming emotionless or suppressing their feelings. That's not what we're aiming for. Emotions are valuable sources of information. They tell you about your values, your boundaries, and your needs. The goal is not to eliminate emotions, but to respond to them consciously rather than reactively. When you understand the science of emotional hijacking, you realize that emotional control is not about willpower or personality. It's about knowledge and technique. It's about understanding your brain's automatic responses and developing better ones. Anyone can learn these skills regardless of their temperament or past experiences with anger management. Chapter 3. The Pause Protocol. Your first line of defense. The most powerful technique for preventing emotional hijacking is also the simplest. It's called the Pause Protocol, and it's your first line of defense against reactive behavior. The Pause Protocol is based on a simple principle. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies your power to choose your response. And in that choice lies your growth and your freedom. Most people react automatically. Something happens, and they immediately respond based on their emotional state. Someone criticizes them, and they defend themselves. Someone cuts them off in traffic, and they honk their horn aggressively. Someone disagrees with them, and they argue back. This automatic reactivity is what keeps them trapped in emotional cycles and gives other people control over their emotional state. The Pause Protocol breaks this automatic pattern. It creates space between what happens to you and how you respond. In that space, you regain your power. You remember that you have choices. You reconnect with your values and your goals. You allow your prefrontal cortex to come back online, so you can respond from wisdom rather than emotion. Here's how the Pause Protocol works. The moment you notice any sign of emotional activation, any hint that you're becoming angry, frustrated, or bothered, you implement an immediate pause. This pause can be as short as 3 seconds or as long as several minutes, depending on the intensity of your emotional reaction and the situation you're in. During the pause, you don't try to solve the problem or figure out what to say. You don't analyze the situation or justify your feelings. You simply create space. You breathe. You allow the initial chemical flood of the emotional hijack to subside without acting on it. The first level of the Pause Protocol is the breath pause. When you notice emotional activation, you immediately take 3 deep, slow breaths. This is not just a relaxation technique, though it does help calm your nervous system. More importantly, it's a pattern interrupt. It breaks the automatic connection between trigger and reaction. Here's how to do the breath pause effectively. Inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Hold the breath for a count of 4. Exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 6. The longer exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the body's rest and digest response. This counteracts the fight or flight activation of emotional hijacking. While you're breathing, focus entirely on the physical sensation of the breath. Feel the air entering your nostrils, filling your lungs, and leaving your body. This mindful focus prevents your mind from spinning stories about what just happened or what you should do next. It anchors you in the present moment and gives your rational brain time to come back online. The second level is the physical pause. If 3 breaths aren't enough to regain your composure, you implement a physical pause. This might mean excusing yourself from a conversation, taking a walk around the block, or simply changing your physical position. Movement helps metabolize the stress hormones that flood your system during emotional activation. The physical pause is particularly important in heated conversations or confrontational situations. When you feel your anger rising, when you notice yourself wanting to say something hurtful or defensive, that's your cue to create physical space. You might say something like, "I need a moment to think about this," or "Let me take a short break and come back to this conversation." Many people resist the physical pause because they think it makes them look weak or because they don't want to give the other person the last word. But the physical pause is actually a sign of strength. It shows that you're in control of yourself and that you're committed to handling the situation effectively rather than just venting your emotions. The third level is the time pause. For more intense emotional reactions or complex situations, you might need hours or even days to fully process your feelings and determine the best response. The time pause prevents you from making decisions or having conversations while you're still emotionally activated. During a time pause, you might tell someone, "This is important to me, and I want to give it the consideration it deserves. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow?" Or you might simply wait before responding to an email or text message that triggered you. The time pause ensures that your responses come from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. The key to making the pause protocol effective is practicing it before you need it. Most people only try to pause when they're already highly activated, and by then, it's much harder to interrupt the emotional hijacking process. Instead, practice pausing during low-level irritations. When someone takes a long time at the grocery store checkout, when you're stuck in traffic, when you receive a mildly annoying email, use these situations to strengthen your pause reflex. The more you practice pausing during minor irritations, the more automatic it becomes during major provocations. You're literally rewiring your brain to choose pause over reaction. You're creating new neural pathways that prioritize conscious choice over automatic response. It's also important to understand that the pause protocol is not about suppressing your emotions or pretending everything is fine. During the pause, you acknowledge your feelings without being controlled by them. You might say to yourself, "I notice I'm feeling angry right now," or "I can feel frustration rising in my body." This acknowledgement validates your emotional experience while maintaining your ability to choose how to respond. The pause protocol also gives you time to remember your bigger picture goals. In the heat of the moment, it's easy to forget what's really important to you. You might value maintaining good relationships, but when you're angry, all you want to do is prove you're right. You might value your reputation for being professional, but when you're frustrated, you're tempted to send a sarcastic email. The pause helps you reconnect with your values, so your responses align with who you want to be rather than how you feel in the moment. Chapter 4. The Reframe Revolution. Changing your internal story. The way you interpret what happens to you determines how you feel about it. Two people can experience the exact same situation and have completely different emotional reactions based on how they frame the experience in their minds. This is why reframing is one of the most powerful tools for emotional control. When you change your internal story about what's happening, you change your emotional response. Most people don't realize they're constantly telling themselves stories about other people's behavior. Someone doesn't return their phone call, and they tell themselves a story that the person is rude or doesn't care about them. A coworker takes credit for their idea, and they tell themselves a story that the coworker is trying to sabotage them. Their spouse forgets to do something they asked, and they tell themselves a story that their spouse doesn't respect them. These internal stories feel like facts, but they're actually interpretations. And since they're interpretations, they can be changed. When you learn to consciously reframe situations in more empowering ways, you gain tremendous control over your emotional state. The first step in reframing is recognizing that you're telling yourself a story. Most people don't distinguish between what actually happened and their interpretation of what happened. They think their story is reality, but what actually happened is just the facts. Someone didn't return your phone call. A coworker presented your idea as their own. Your spouse forgot to do something. Everything else, the meaning you attach to these events, the motives you assign to other people, the implications you draw about their character or their feelings about you, that's your story. Once you recognize that you're telling yourself a story, you can consciously choose a better one. A story that serves you rather than one that makes you suffer. A story that empowers you rather than one that makes you a victim. A story that opens up possibilities rather than one that closes them down. Let me give you some examples of how this works in practice. Your boss gives you critical feedback on a project. Your immediate story might be, "She's trying to make me look bad," or "She doesn't appreciate my work," or "She's impossible to please." These stories generate feelings of anger, resentment, and frustration. But you could reframe the situation completely. Alternative story 1. She's trying to help me improve my skills and advance in my career. This story generates feelings of gratitude and motivation. Alternative story 2. She has high standards because this project is important to the company's success. This story generates feelings of respect and determination. Alternative story 3. She's under a lot of pressure from her superiors and is passing along feedback she received. This story generates feelings of empathy and understanding. Notice that all of these alternative stories could be true. You have no way of knowing your boss's real motives or the full context of her feedback. So why not choose the story that makes you feel better and motivates you to respond more effectively? Here's another example. You're driving and someone cuts you off without signaling. Your immediate story might be, "That person is a selfish jerk who doesn't care about anyone else's safety." This story generates anger and stress, but you could reframe it. Alternative story 1. That person is probably dealing with an emergency and is focused on getting somewhere important quickly. Alternative story 2. That person made a mistake and probably doesn't even realize they cut me off. Alternative story 3. That person is having a difficult day and is not thinking clearly. These reframes don't excuse dangerous driving, but they prevent you from carrying anger and stress that doesn't serve you. They help you respond from a place of understanding rather than rage. The key to effective reframing is finding alternative stories that are both plausible and empowering. They don't have to be the most likely explanation, but they have to be possible, and they have to move you toward a more resourceful emotional state. There are several powerful reframing techniques you can use in different situations. The first is the ignorance reframe. Instead of assuming that people who behave badly are malicious or selfish, assume they're ignorant. They don't know better. They haven't been taught better social skills or emotional intelligence. They're doing the best they can with their current level of awareness. This reframe generates compassion instead of anger. The second is the pain reframe. Instead of assuming that difficult people are trying to hurt you, assume they're in pain themselves. Hurt people hurt people. People who are rude, aggressive, or inconsiderate are usually dealing with their own stress, insecurity, or emotional wounds. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps you respond with empathy rather than defensiveness. The third is the learning reframe. Instead of seeing difficult situations as problems or attacks, see them as opportunities to practice your emotional regulation skills. Every challenging person is a teacher, helping you become stronger and more skilled. Every frustrating situation is a chance to prove to yourself that you can stay calm and composed no matter what happens around you. The fourth is the temporary reframe. Instead of seeing someone's bad mood or difficult behavior as a permanent characteristic, see it as a temporary state. Everyone has bad days. Everyone deals with stress and challenges that can affect their behavior. The person who's rude to you today might be kind and helpful tomorrow. This reframe prevents you from writing people off based on limited interactions. The fifth is the growth reframe. Instead of seeing criticism or feedback as attacks on your character, see them as information that can help you improve. Even if the feedback is delivered poorly or motivated by someone else's agenda, there might still be valuable insights you can extract. This reframe turns potential sources of anger into opportunities for development. Reframing takes practice because your brain is wired to notice threats and problems. Your survival instincts make you quick to interpret ambiguous situations negatively. But with conscious effort, you can train your brain to look for alternative explanations and more empowering stories. The goal is not to become naive or to excuse genuinely harmful behavior. Some people do act with malicious intent. Some situations are genuinely unfair or problematic. But even in these cases, the most empowering response usually comes from framing the situation in a way that preserves your emotional equilibrium and positions you to respond effectively. When you master reframing, you realize that very few things that happen to you are inherently good or bad. They're mostly neutral events that become positive or negative based on how you choose to interpret them. This realization is incredibly liberating because it means you're never at the mercy of circumstances. You always have the power to choose a story that serves you. Chapter 5. The Detachment System. Emotional Independence. The ultimate goal of emotional control is not just to manage your reactions in the moment, but to develop a deep sense of emotional independence. This means that your emotional state is determined by your own choices and values, not by other people's behavior or external circumstances. It means that while you can still be affected by what happens around you, you're not controlled by it. Most people are emotionally dependent. Their mood depends on how others treat them. Their self-esteem depends on external validation. Their stress levels depend on whether things go according to their plans. This emotional dependence makes them vulnerable to every person they encounter and every situation they face. It gives other people enormous power over their inner experience. Emotional independence is different. It's the ability to maintain your emotional equilibrium regardless of what's happening around you. It's not indifference or disconnection from others. It's not becoming cold or uncaring. It's developing an inner stability that allows you to care deeply while also being unshakable. The foundation of emotional independence is understanding the difference between what's in your control and what's not. You cannot control other people's behavior, but you can control your response to it. You cannot control external circumstances, but you can control your attitude toward them. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control what you do about it. This understanding leads to what I call the detachment system. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care about outcomes or relationships. It means you don't attach your emotional well-being to things you cannot control. You care about your work, but you don't attach your self-worth to whether your boss appreciates you. You care about your relationships, but you don't attach your happiness to whether others always treat you well. The first principle of the detachment system is emotional self-sufficiency. This means that you meet your own emotional needs rather than depending on others to meet them for you. If you need validation, you validate yourself. If you need security, you create it through your own actions and mindset. If you need love, you start by loving yourself unconditionally. Most people seek these emotional needs from external sources, which makes them vulnerable to disappointment and manipulation. They need their boss to appreciate them to feel valuable. They need their friends to include them to feel worthy. They need their romantic partner to constantly reassure them to feel secure. This dependence creates anxiety and resentment because other people cannot and will not always provide what you need when you need it. When you become emotionally self-sufficient, you can enjoy validation, appreciation, and love from others without needing them to maintain your emotional stability. This makes your relationships healthier and more enjoyable because you're not constantly seeking something from other people. You're able to give and receive from a place of abundance rather than neediness. The second principle is outcome independence. This means that while you work toward your goals and preferences, you don't attach your emotional state to whether you achieve them. You prefer that people treat you with respect, but you don't need them to in order to maintain your self-respect. You want your projects to succeed, but you don't need them to in order to feel successful. Outcome independence doesn't mean you don't care about results or that you don't work hard to achieve your goals. It means that your emotional well-being doesn't rise and fall with external outcomes. You maintain your inner stability regardless of what happens because you know that your value as a person is not determined by external circumstances. This principle is particularly powerful in dealing with difficult people because it removes their ability to manipulate or control you through their behavior. If someone is rude to you and you need their approval to feel good about yourself, their rudeness has power over you. But if you're outcome independent, their behavior becomes irrelevant to your emotional state. They can be as rude as they want, and it doesn't affect your inner peace. The third principle is identity independence. This means that your sense of who you are is not dependent on external roles, achievements, or other people's opinions. You know who you are at your core, and that identity remains stable regardless of changing circumstances. Many people derive their identity from their job, their relationships, their possessions, or their achievements. When these external things change or are threatened, their sense of self becomes unstable. They take criticism personally because they see it as an attack on their identity. They get defensive when challenged because they feel their worth is being questioned. When you develop identity independence, you see yourself as separate from these external roles and achievements. You might be a manager, but that's what you do, not who you are. You might be successful, but that's your current situation, not your essential identity. This separation allows you to receive feedback, face challenges, and deal with difficult people without feeling like your core self is under attack. The fourth principle is boundary mastery. Emotional independence requires clear boundaries between yourself and others. You need to know where you end and they begin. You need to distinguish between their emotions and your emotions, their problems and your problems, their responsibilities and your responsibilities. Many people struggle with emotional boundaries. They take on other people's emotions as if they were their own. They feel guilty when others are unhappy, even when they're not responsible for that unhappiness. They feel obligated to fix other people's problems or manage their emotional states. This lack of boundaries creates constant stress and makes it impossible to maintain emotional independence. Healthy boundaries allow you to care about others without taking responsibility for their emotional well-being. You can empathize with someone's pain without absorbing it. You can support someone through difficulties without feeling obligated to solve their problems. You can maintain your own emotional equilibrium while still being present and compassionate with others. The fifth principle is present moment awareness. Emotional independence is easier to maintain when you're focused on the present rather than ruminating about the past or worrying about the future. Most emotional reactivity comes from mental time travel. You replay past hurts and imagine future threats. You carry grudges from yesterday and anxieties about tomorrow. When you anchor yourself in the present moment, you're dealing only with what's actually happening right now, not with all the stories and projections your mind creates. This makes situations much more manageable and reduces emotional reactivity. You respond to what is rather than what you think might be or what you remember was. Developing emotional independence through the detachment system takes time and practice. It requires fundamentally changing how you relate to your emotions, your relationships, and your circumstances. But the freedom it provides is extraordinary. When you're emotionally independent, you become unshakable. Other people's behavior might disappoint you, but it doesn't devastate you. External circumstances might challenge you, but they don't control you. You maintain your inner peace regardless of the chaos around you. Chapter 6. The 4 personality types that trigger everyone. Not all difficult people are created equal. There are specific personality types that consistently trigger emotional reactions in others, and each type requires a different approach to maintain your emotional equilibrium. Once you understand these 4 archetypes and learn the specific strategies for dealing with each one, you'll never be caught off guard again. The first archetype is the aggressive dominator. These are people who use intimidation, loud voices, interruptions, and hostile body language to control situations and people around them. They might be your demanding boss who yells when things don't go their way, the road rage driver who honks aggressively and makes threatening gestures, or the family member who dominates every conversation and shoots down other people's ideas. Aggressive dominators trigger fight-or-flight responses in most people. When someone raises their voice or becomes hostile, your amygdala immediately interprets this as a threat and floods your system with stress hormones. Your natural instinct is either to fight back with equal aggression or to retreat and submit. Both responses give the dominator exactly what they want, either a conflict they can escalate or submission they can exploit. The key to dealing with aggressive dominators is to refuse to play their game. Don't match their energy level or try to out-dominate them. Instead, remain calm and speak in a lower, slower tone than normal. This has a neurological effect called emotional contagion in reverse. Instead of catching their aggressive energy, you're projecting calm energy that can actually lower their arousal level. Maintain steady eye contact without staring aggressively. Keep your body language open but grounded. Don't cross your arms defensively, but don't make yourself small either. Use what I call the broken record technique. Pick one simple, reasonable statement and repeat it calmly, no matter how much they escalate. For example, I understand you're upset, and I want to find a solution that works for both of us. The second archetype is the passive-aggressive manipulator. These people express their anger and frustration indirectly through sarcasm, silent treatment, deliberate inefficiency, or subtle sabotage. They might be the co-worker who agrees to help you but then forgets repeatedly. The romantic partner who says they're fine but then punishes you with coldness, or the friend who makes cutting jokes at your expense, and then says they were just kidding. Passive-aggressive manipulators are particularly frustrating because their behavior is ambiguous. You know something is wrong, but when you address it directly, they deny there's a problem. This makes you question your own perceptions and often leads to explosive anger when you finally reach your breaking point. The strategy for dealing with passive-aggressive manipulators is radical transparency and boundary setting. Call out the behavior directly and calmly. I notice that every time we discuss this topic, you say you're fine, but then you seem distant. I'd prefer if you could tell me directly what's bothering you. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking you're imagining things. Set clear consequences for passive-aggressive behavior and follow through consistently. If someone says they'll do something but repeatedly forgets, stop relying on them and find alternative solutions. Don't reward their manipulation with emotional reactions or by trying harder to please them. This only reinforces the behavior. The third archetype is the emotional vampire. These are people who constantly complain, dramatize minor problems, seek attention through crisis, and drain the energy of everyone around them. They might be the co-worker who has a new crisis every day, the friend who calls constantly to vent about the same problems without ever taking advice, or the family member who turns every gathering into a therapy session about their latest tragedy. Emotional vampires trigger two problematic responses in most people. Either you become their unpaid therapist, constantly trying to fix their problems and manage their emotions, or you become frustrated and judgmental about their constant negativity. Both responses drain your energy and emotional reserves. The approach for emotional vampires is compassionate detachment. You can care about their well-being without taking responsibility for their emotional state. Set time limits for conversations. I have 15 minutes to talk, and then I need to get back to work. Don't try to solve their problems or give advice unless they specifically ask for it. And even then, limit yourself to 1 or 2 suggestions. Use the broken record technique again, but this time to redirect the conversation. That sounds challenging, and I hope you find a solution. I need to focus on something else right now. Practice emotional boundaries by not absorbing their negative energy. You can listen without taking on their emotions as your own. The fourth archetype is the narcissistic attention seeker. These people need to be the center of attention at all times. They interrupt others, monopolize conversations, exaggerate their achievements, and become hostile when they're not getting enough focus. They might be the colleague who takes credit for team accomplishments, the acquaintance who turns every story you tell into a bigger story about themselves, or the social media friend who constantly posts dramatic updates designed to generate sympathy or admiration. Narcissistic attention seekers trigger frustration because they seem oblivious to social norms and other people's needs. You want to call them out, correct their exaggerations, or find ways to get recognition for your own contributions. These responses often backfire because they provide the attention and drama that narcissistic people crave. The strategy for dealing with narcissistic attention seekers is strategic disengagement. Don't compete for attention or try to correct their stories. Instead, give them brief, polite acknowledgement and then redirect your attention elsewhere. That's interesting, John. Then turn to someone else or change the subject. Don't feed their need for drama by getting upset or arguing with them. This only gives them more material and energy to work with. In group settings, focus on connecting with other people rather than trying to manage the narcissistic person's behavior. Often, others are as frustrated as you are and will appreciate your leadership in redirecting the group's energy. Understanding these 4 archetypes helps you realize that difficult behavior is usually not personal. Aggressive dominators have learned that intimidation gets them what they want. Passive-aggressive manipulators have learned that direct confrontation is dangerous, so they express anger indirectly. Emotional vampires have learned that crisis and drama get them attention and support. Narcissistic attention seekers have learned that they need to be the center of attention to feel valuable. None of these patterns are really about you. They're coping mechanisms that these people developed based on their own experiences and psychological needs. When you understand the underlying pattern, you can respond to the pattern rather than reacting to the specific behavior. This keeps you calm and strategic rather than emotional and reactive. Chapter 7. The Social Intelligence Decoder. Reading beyond words. Most people focus only on what others say, but the real communication happens below the surface. Body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, and energy levels communicate far more than words ever do. When you learn to read these subtle signals, you gain tremendous power over social situations because you can see what's really happening beneath the surface conversation. Understanding social intelligence starts with recognizing that all human behavior serves a purpose. When someone acts in a way that seems irrational or frustrating, they're usually trying to meet a psychological need. They might need to feel important, safe, understood, or in control. When you can identify the underlying need driving someone's behavior, you can respond to the need rather than the behavior, which is far more effective. The first level of social intelligence is reading emotional states through physical cues. When people are stressed, anxious, or upset, their bodies reveal it even when their words don't. Stress shows up as increased muscle tension, particularly in the shoulders, jaw, and hands. Anxious people often display self-soothing behaviors like touching their face, playing with their hair, or fidgeting with objects. Angry people show micro-expressions of tension around their eyes and mouth, even when they're trying to appear calm. Learning to spot these physical signs gives you a huge advantage because you can adjust your approach before someone's emotions escalate. If you notice that someone is becoming tense during a conversation, you can lower your voice, slow down your speech, or suggest taking a break. This prevents conflicts before they start and helps people feel more comfortable around you. The second level is understanding personality-driven behavior patterns. Some people are naturally more introverted and need time to process information before responding. Others are extroverted and think out loud, sometimes saying things they don't really mean. Some people are detail-oriented and need thorough explanations, while others are big-picture thinkers who get impatient with too much information. When you can quickly assess someone's personality style, you can adapt your communication approach to match their preferences. With introverted people, give them space to think and don't pressure them for immediate responses. With extroverted people, be prepared for rapid-fire conversation and don't take their quick reactions personally. With detail-oriented people, provide thorough explanations and be prepared to answer specific questions. With big-picture people, lead with the main point and only provide details if they ask. The third level is recognizing power dynamics and social hierarchies. Every social interaction involves some element of status and power, even if it's subtle. People signal their perceived status through posture, eye contact, voice tone, and the amount of space they take up. Understanding these dynamics helps you navigate social situations more effectively. High-status individuals typically display open body language, make direct eye contact, speak with confident voice tones, and take up more physical space. They interrupt others more frequently and expect to be listened to when they speak. Lower-status individuals often display more closed body language, avoid direct eye contact, speak with less confident tones, and make themselves smaller physically. This doesn't mean that high-status behavior is better or that you should always try to appear high status. It means you should be aware of these dynamics so you can respond appropriately. If you're dealing with someone who needs to feel high status, you can give them that without compromising your own position. If you're dealing with someone who feels low status, you can help them feel more comfortable and confident. The fourth level is detecting deception and incongruence. When people's words don't match their true feelings, their bodies usually reveal the discrepancy. Someone might say they're fine while their facial expression shows distress. They might claim to agree with you while their body language shows resistance. Learning to spot these incongruences helps you understand what people really think and feel, not just what they're willing to say. Common signs of incongruence include mismatched facial expressions, where someone's mouth says one thing but their eyes say another. Voice-body mismatches, where someone's words are positive but their tone or posture is negative. Timing inconsistencies, where someone's emotional reactions are delayed or seem forced. When you notice incongruence, don't immediately call it out directly. Instead, create space for the person to express their real feelings. Ask open-ended questions like, "How are you really feeling about this?" Or, "Is there something else you'd like to discuss?" Often, people are not fully aware of their own emotional state or feel unsafe expressing their true feelings initially. The fifth level is understanding cultural and contextual communication styles. Different cultures, generations, and professional environments have different norms for emotional expression, directness, and social interaction. What seems rude or aggressive in one context might be perfectly normal in another. What seems friendly and appropriate in one setting might be too informal in another. Developing cultural sensitivity helps you avoid misinterpreting others' behavior and prevents you from triggering negative reactions unintentionally. Before judging someone's communication style, consider their background and the context you're operating in. What might seem like disrespect could be a cultural difference in communication style. What might appear to be coldness could be professional appropriateness. The key to using social intelligence effectively is to gather information without making judgments. Observe what you see and hear, without immediately deciding what it means about the person's character or intentions. Look for patterns over time, rather than making conclusions based on single interactions. Use your observations to guide your responses, not to judge or manipulate others. Social intelligence also requires emotional regulation on your part. When you can see what's really happening in social interactions, you might notice manipulation, insecurity, or negative intentions that others miss. It's tempting to feel superior or to use this information to your advantage. But effective social intelligence is about creating better interactions for everyone, not about gaining power over others. Chapter 8. The Conflict Transformation Method. Conflict is inevitable in human relationships, but suffering through conflict is optional. Most people approach conflict as a battle to be won or lost, but this mindset guarantees that someone will be hurt and relationships will be damaged. The conflict transformation method reframes conflict as an opportunity for deeper understanding, stronger relationships, and personal growth. Traditional conflict resolution focuses on finding compromises and solutions, which can be valuable. But conflict transformation goes deeper. It recognizes that most conflicts are not really about the surface issue people are arguing about. They're about underlying needs, values, fears, and past experiences that create emotional charge around specific situations. For example, two co-workers might argue about project deadlines, but the real conflict might be about respect, autonomy, or fear of failure. A romantic couple might fight about household chores, but the underlying issue might be about feeling valued or supported. A parent and teenager might battle over curfew, but the deeper conflict might be about independence and safety. The first principle of conflict transformation is shifting from positions to interests. Positions are what people say they want. I need you to be home by 10 o'clock. I deserve a promotion this year. You need to clean up after yourself. Interests are the underlying needs and concerns that drive these positions. Safety, recognition, respect, fairness, autonomy. When you focus on interests rather than positions, you often discover that people's underlying needs are not in conflict at all. The parent wants their teenager to be safe, and the teenager wants to be trusted and have freedom. Both needs can be met through creative solutions that rigid position-taking would never reveal. To identify interests, ask questions that go beneath the surface demands. Instead of arguing about what someone wants, explore why they want it. Help me understand what's most important to you about this. What would need to happen for you to feel good about this situation? What are you most concerned about? The second principle is emotional validation before problem solving. Most people try to solve conflicts by immediately jumping into negotiations and compromises. But this approach fails when people are emotionally activated. When someone feels angry, hurt, or misunderstood, their rational problem-solving abilities are compromised. They need emotional acknowledgement before they can engage in productive dialogue. Emotional validation doesn't mean you agree with someone's position or behavior. It means you acknowledge their feelings and show that you understand their experience. I can see that you're really frustrated about this. It sounds like you're feeling unheard. I understand that this situation is really important to you. Validation has a powerful calming effect because it meets people's fundamental need to be understood. When people feel heard and acknowledged, their defensive reactions often decrease dramatically. They become more open to hearing your perspective and more willing to work toward mutually beneficial solutions. The third principle is collaborative exploration rather than adversarial debate. Traditional conflict approaches involve each side presenting their case and trying to convince the other side they're wrong. This creates a win-lose dynamic where someone has to be right and someone has to be wrong. Collaborative exploration treats conflict as a shared puzzle to solve together. Use language that emphasizes partnership rather than opposition. Instead of, "You always interrupt me," try, "I've noticed we both get excited and sometimes talk over each other. How can we make sure we both get heard?" Instead of, "Your idea won't work because," try, "I'm having some concerns about that approach. Can we explore some alternatives together?" Ask questions that invite exploration rather than questions that put people on the defensive. "What would make this work better for you?" is more collaborative than, "Why don't you just do it the right way?" "What am I missing about your perspective?" is more open than, "How can you possibly think that?" The fourth principle is taking responsibility for your own contribution to the conflict. Most people focus entirely on what the other person did wrong and what they need to change. But every conflict involves at least two people, and everyone contributes something to the dynamic. Taking ownership of your part, even if you believe the other person is more wrong, dramatically changes the energy of the interaction. This doesn't mean accepting blame for things you didn't do or apologizing for having needs and boundaries. It means acknowledging ways you might have contributed to misunderstandings, escalated emotions, or made the situation more difficult. "I realize I didn't communicate clearly about my expectations. I can see how my tone might have come across as dismissive. I should have brought this up sooner, instead of letting it build up." When you take responsibility first, you often inspire the other person to do the same. You model the kind of mature, relationship-focused approach that leads to genuine resolution rather than temporary truces. The fifth principle is focusing on future solutions rather than past grievances. Many conflicts get stuck because people spend all their time relitigating what happened, who was right, and who was wrong. While it's important to understand what went wrong, the goal should be preventing similar problems in the future rather than proving who was more justified in their reactions. Shift the conversation toward future-focused questions. How can we handle this differently next time? What would need to change for both of us to feel good about this? What agreements can we make going forward? This approach is more productive because it empowers both people to create change rather than just assigning blame. The conflict transformation method requires you to regulate your own emotions throughout the process. When someone is criticizing you or expressing anger, your natural instinct is to defend yourself or counterattack. But transformation requires you to stay curious about their experience while also maintaining your own center. This is where all the previous techniques become crucial. Use the pause protocol to stay calm. Apply reframing to look for the underlying needs beneath aggressive or hurtful words. Practice detachment to avoid taking things personally while still caring about the relationship and the outcome. Remember that conflict transformation is not about avoiding conflict or keeping the peace at any cost. Healthy conflicts can strengthen relationships by addressing real issues and clearing up misunderstandings. The goal is not to eliminate conflict, but to engage in it skillfully, with respect for both people's needs and commitment to the relationship's long-term health. Chapter 9. The Energy Management System. Your emotional state is not just determined by what happens to you, but by your overall energy levels, stress management, and lifestyle choices. When you're physically depleted, emotionally drained, or mentally exhausted, you have much less capacity for emotional regulation. The energy management system ensures that you maintain the internal resources necessary to stay calm and composed, even in challenging situations. Most people think of emotional control as a purely mental skill, but it's actually a whole-body phenomenon. Your brain uses enormous amounts of energy for emotional regulation. When your energy reserves are low, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and impulse control, goes offline first. This is why you're more likely to snap at people when you're tired, hungry, or stressed. The first component of energy management is physical energy optimization. This includes the obvious factors like adequate sleep, proper nutrition, and regular exercise. But it also includes less obvious factors like breathing patterns, posture, and environmental stresses. Sleep deprivation has a devastating effect on emotional regulation. When you don't get enough quality sleep, your amygdala becomes hyperactive, while your prefrontal cortex becomes sluggish. This combination makes you more likely to perceive threats where none exist, and less able to control your reactions to those perceived threats. Even one night of poor sleep can significantly impair your ability to handle difficult people and stressful situations. Create a sleep environment that supports quality rest. Keep your bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. Avoid screens for at least an hour before bedtime, because blue light disrupts your natural sleep hormones. Establish a consistent sleep schedule, even on weekends, to regulate your circadian rhythms. If you struggle with racing thoughts at bedtime, keep a notebook next to your bed and write down anything you're worried about or need to remember. This helps clear your mind for sleep. Blood sugar stability is equally important for emotional regulation. When your blood sugar drops, your body releases stress hormones to try to bring it back up. These stress hormones make you more irritable, anxious, and reactive. Eating regular, balanced meals with protein, healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates helps maintain stable energy levels throughout the day. Avoid the common trap of using caffeine and sugar to manage energy crashes. While these can provide temporary boosts, they often lead to larger crashes later, creating a cycle of energy instability that makes emotional regulation much more difficult. The second component is emotional energy conservation. Just as your body has limited physical energy, your mind has limited emotional energy. Every time you have to regulate a strong emotion, make a difficult decision, or resist an impulse, you use some of your emotional energy reserves. When these reserves are depleted, you become more reactive and less able to maintain your composure. One of the biggest drains on emotional energy is carrying unresolved emotional baggage from past interactions. If you had a frustrating conversation with a coworker in the morning, and you spend the rest of the day replaying it in your mind and imagining what you should have said, you're continuously draining your emotional energy. By the time you get home, you have little left for your family or personal activities. Learn to process and release emotional experiences rather than carrying them with you throughout the day. After any interaction that triggers strong emotions, take a few minutes to consciously process what happened. Acknowledge your feelings without judgment. I'm feeling frustrated because that conversation didn't go the way I hoped. Then consciously choose to let it go. I did my best in that situation, and I'll handle it differently if it comes up again. The third component is attention management. Your attention is a finite resource, and where you focus your attention dramatically affects your emotional state. If you spend your mental energy focusing on things that frustrate, worry, or annoy you, you'll feel frustrated, worried, and annoyed. If you consciously direct your attention toward things that inspire, energize, or calm you, you'll feel more positive and resilient. Most people allow their attention to be hijacked by whatever is loudest, most urgent, or most emotionally charged. They start their day by checking news and social media, filling their minds with information designed to trigger strong emotional reactions. They spend their time at work focused on problems, complaints, and stressful deadlines. They end their day by consuming entertainment that's designed to be dramatic and emotionally stimulating. This pattern of attention management is exhausting and makes emotional regulation much more difficult. Instead, consciously choose what deserves your mental energy. Start your day with activities that center and energize you, whether that's meditation, exercise, reading something inspiring, or simply sitting quietly with your coffee. Throughout the day, regularly redirect your attention away from drama and negativity toward things that support your well-being and goals. The fourth component is environment management. Your physical and social environment has a profound impact on your emotional state and your ability to regulate your emotions. Cluttered, noisy, or chaotic environments create low-level stress that depletes your regulatory resources. Toxic relationships and negative social dynamics do the same thing. Take inventory of your environmental stressors and eliminate as many as possible. This might mean organizing your living and working spaces, reducing noise pollution, or limiting time with people who consistently drain your energy. Create environments that support calmness and focus rather than stress and reactivity. The fifth component is recovery and restoration practices. Just as athletes need recovery time between workouts to maintain peak performance, you need regular practices that restore your emotional and mental energy. This doesn't just mean relaxation, though that's important. It means activities that actively replenish your resources and strengthen your capacity for emotional regulation. Different people find restoration through different activities. Some people restore through solitude and quiet activities, like reading, walking in nature, or creative pursuits. Others restore through social connection and shared activities. Some need physical movement and exercise, while others need mental stimulation and learning. The key is identifying what truly restores you versus what you think should restore you or what other people find restorative. Pay attention to how different activities affect your energy levels and emotional state. Activities that truly restore you should leave you feeling more energized, centered, and capable, not more depleted or agitated. Regular restoration is not a luxury or something to do when you have extra time. It's a necessity for maintaining your capacity to handle difficult people and challenging situations with grace and composure. When you consistently manage your energy levels, you become much more resilient and much less reactive to external stresses. Chapter 10. The Mastery Mindset. Long-term emotional evolution. Developing the ability to never get angry or bothered by anyone is not a destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly forever. It's a continuous process of growth, refinement, and deepening mastery. The people who seem naturally calm and unshakable have developed what I call the mastery mindset, a way of approaching life that treats every challenging interaction as an opportunity for growth rather than a problem to endure. The mastery mindset starts with understanding that emotional mastery is a skill like any other skill. Just as a musician doesn't expect to play complex pieces perfectly without years of practice, you shouldn't expect to maintain perfect emotional composure without consistent practice and refinement. The difference is that with emotional mastery, your practice opportunities come naturally through daily life. Every difficult person you encounter is a chance to strengthen your skills. Most people see challenging interactions as things to avoid or get through as quickly as possible. They try to minimize conflict, avoid difficult people, and create lives that are as emotionally comfortable as possible. While this is understandable, it actually prevents growth and keeps you vulnerable to emotional reactivity when you inevitably encounter situations you can't avoid or control. The mastery mindset reframes difficult interactions as valuable training opportunities. That coworker who always criticizes your work becomes your patience trainer. The family member who pushes your buttons becomes your detachment practice partner. The stranger who's rude to you in public becomes your compassion exercise. Instead of dreading these interactions or taking them personally, you start to welcome them as chances to prove to yourself that you can stay centered regardless of external circumstances. This shift in perspective is incredibly empowering because it puts you in control of your own development. You're no longer dependent on other people being reasonable, kind, or respectful for you to feel good. You're not waiting for your environment to become less stressful or your relationships to become easier. You're actively using whatever circumstances you encounter to become stronger and more skilled. The first principle of the mastery mindset is progressive challenge seeking. Just as physical training requires gradually increasing resistance to build strength, emotional training requires gradually exposing yourself to more challenging situations to build resilience. This doesn't mean seeking out conflict or putting yourself in dangerous situations. It means consciously choosing to handle progressively more difficult interactions rather than avoiding them. Start with low-stakes situations where the consequences of not being perfect are minimal. Practice staying calm with mildly annoying strangers before trying to maintain composure with your most triggering family members. Use minor irritations like slow service or technical difficulties as training grounds for bigger challenges. As you build confidence and skill, gradually take on more challenging interactions. Volunteer to have difficult conversations at work. Choose to engage with people who have different political or social views rather than avoiding those discussions. Practice maintaining your center in higher pressure situations where more is at stake. The second principle is failure reframing. In the mastery mindset, there are no failures, only data. Every time you react emotionally, lose your temper, or get bothered by someone, you gain valuable information about your current skill level and areas that need more development. Instead of judging yourself for not being perfect, you analyze what happened and use that information to improve your approach next time. Ask yourself specific questions after challenging interactions. What was the trigger that caused you to lose your composure? What physical sensations did you notice before you became reactive? What story did you tell yourself about the other person's behavior? What technique could you have used differently? What would you do if the same situation happened again. This analytical approach prevents you from getting stuck in cycles of guilt, self-criticism, or resignation. Instead of, "I'm just not good at staying calm," you think, "I need more practice with the pause protocol when someone interrupts me repeatedly." Instead of, "That person made me so angry," you think, "I need to work on not taking criticism personally when I'm already stressed." The third principle is pattern recognition and adaptation. As you develop more experience with emotional regulation, you'll start to notice patterns in your reactions and in other people's behavior. You'll recognize your most common triggers. Identify the early warning signs of emotional activation and predict which techniques work best in different situations. This pattern recognition allows you to become proactive rather than reactive. You can prepare for challenging interactions by mentally rehearsing your desired responses. You can recognize potentially difficult situations early and implement preventive strategies. You can adapt your approach based on the specific person and context, rather than using the same techniques in every situation. For example, you might notice that you're most reactive to criticism when you're tired, so you make sure to get adequate sleep before important meetings. You might recognize that certain family members always bring up controversial topics at gatherings, so you prepare neutral responses in advance. You might realize that you handle interruptions better when you're standing rather than sitting, so you adjust your physical position before difficult conversations. The fourth principle is teaching and mentoring others. One of the most powerful ways to deepen your own mastery is to help others develop their emotional regulation skills. When you teach someone else how to stay calm under pressure or how to handle difficult people, you reinforce your own learning and often discover new insights about the techniques you've been practicing. This doesn't mean becoming a formal teacher or coach, though you might choose to do that eventually. It means being the calming presence in your family, workplace, or social circle. It means modeling emotional regulation for others and gently helping them when they're struggling with reactive patterns. It means sharing techniques that have worked for you when people ask for advice. Teaching others also keeps you accountable to your own standards. It's much harder to justify reactive behavior when you've been advising others to stay calm and composed. You become more conscious of your own emotional state because you know others are watching and learning from your example. The fifth principle is continuous learning and refinement. The mastery mindset involves staying curious and open to new approaches, rather than thinking you've learned everything you need to know. Emotional regulation is a deep and complex skill with many layers and subtleties. There are always new situations to navigate, new techniques to try, and deeper levels of mastery to achieve. Read books about psychology, neuroscience, and communication. Study wisdom traditions that have been developing emotional mastery techniques for thousands of years. Learn from people who demonstrate exceptional emotional regulation in their professional or personal lives. Stay curious about what makes people tick and how different approaches might work in different contexts. The mastery mindset also involves regular self-reflection and assessment. Periodically evaluate your progress, identify areas where you've grown, and set new challenges for yourself. Celebrate your improvements while remaining honest about areas that still need work. Adjust your practices based on what you've learned about yourself and what's working best for your personality and lifestyle. Remember that mastery is not about becoming emotionless or perfectly controlled. It's about having conscious choice over your responses and maintaining your inner equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. It's about becoming so skilled at emotional regulation that staying calm and composed becomes your natural default, not something you have to force or fake. How to never get angry or bothered by anyone. Script Part 3, Chapter 11. The Professional Mastery Protocol. The workplace is often the most challenging environment for maintaining emotional control because it combines high stakes with personality conflicts, power dynamics, and constant pressure. Unlike personal relationships, where you can choose to limit contact with difficult people, professional environments require you to work effectively with people you might not like or respect. This chapter will give you the advanced strategies for remaining unshakable in your career while actually accelerating your professional success. The first principle of professional emotional mastery is understanding that your emotional control directly impacts your career trajectory. People who can remain calm under pressure, handle criticism gracefully, and navigate conflict skillfully are perceived as leadership material. Those who react emotionally to workplace challenges are seen as liabilities, regardless of their technical skills or qualifications. This creates a powerful incentive structure. Every time you choose composure over reactivity, you're not just feeling better in the moment. You're building your professional reputation as someone who can handle responsibility and pressure. Every time you respond to workplace drama with equanimity, you're demonstrating executive-level emotional intelligence. The challenging boss scenario is one of the most common professional triggers. Whether your boss is micromanaging, taking credit for your work, setting unrealistic expectations, or providing harsh criticism, your response to their behavior determines both your immediate experience and your long-term career prospects. The key insight is that challenging bosses are often under tremendous pressure themselves. Their behavior is usually more about their own stress, insecurities, and performance anxieties than about your capabilities. When you understand this context, you can respond strategically rather than personally. If your boss is highly critical, resist the urge to defend yourself immediately or become defensive. Instead, ask clarifying questions that demonstrate your commitment to excellence. I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're looking for. Can you help me identify the specific areas where I should focus my improvements? This response shows maturity and redirects the conversation towards solutions rather than blame. If your boss takes credit for your work, document your contributions without making it about confrontation. Send follow-up emails that outline your role in projects. Thanks for the positive feedback on the Johnson project. I'm glad my research on market trends and my proposal for the new pricing strategy contributed to the successful outcome. This creates a record while appearing collaborative rather than defensive. The difficult colleague dynamic requires a different approach because peer relationships are more complex than hierarchical ones. You need to maintain working relationships while protecting yourself from undermining, gossip, or passive-aggressive behavior. The most effective strategy is professional boundaries with personal warmth. Be friendly and collegial in your interactions, but don't share personal information or get drawn into office politics. When colleagues try to involve you in complaining about others or spreading gossip, redirect the conversation. I'd rather focus on how we can make this project successful. Or, I haven't had that experience with them, but let's talk about how to move forward. If a colleague tries to undermine you in meetings, respond with facts rather than emotions. Actually, the data shows. Or, my experience with that approach has been. Don't attack their credibility. Just present alternative information confidently. This approach makes you appear knowledgeable and reasonable while highlighting their inaccuracy without direct confrontation. High-pressure deadline situations are where emotional control becomes most critical. When everyone around you is stressed and reactive, your calmness becomes a superpower. You can think more clearly, make better decisions, and often become the person others look to for leadership. Create personal systems for high-pressure periods. Break large projects into smaller, manageable tasks. Set internal deadlines that are earlier than external ones to create buffer time. Communicate proactively with stakeholders about progress and potential challenges rather than waiting for them to ask. These practices reduce external pressure and give you more control over stressful situations. During crisis moments, use your emotional regulation skills to become the stabilizing force in your team. Speak more slowly and deliberately than usual. Ask thoughtful questions that help others clarify their thinking. Focus on solutions rather than problems. What are our options here? And what would need to happen for this to work? Are much more productive than, "This is impossible," or "Why didn't someone think of this earlier?" Feedback and criticism, whether in formal performance reviews or casual comments, trigger defensive reactions in most people. But professional mastery requires developing the ability to receive feedback as valuable information rather than personal attacks. When receiving criticism, resist the urge to explain, justify, or defend your actions immediately. Instead, ask questions that demonstrate your openness to learning. Can you give me a specific example of when this was a problem? Or, what would success look like in this area? This approach shows that you're focused on improvement rather than self-protection. If feedback feels unfair or inaccurate, don't argue in the moment. Thank the person for their perspective and ask for time to reflect on their comments. This gives you space to consider whether there might be some truth to their observations and to formulate a thoughtful response if you disagree. Office politics and interpersonal drama are inevitable in most workplace environments. The key to navigating these situations without getting emotionally triggered is maintaining strategic neutrality. You don't have to take sides in every conflict or have opinions about every personality clash. When people try to draw you into conflicts that don't directly involve you, practice diplomatic disengagement. That sounds like something you should discuss directly with them. Or, "I don't have enough information to have an opinion on that situation." This keeps you out of unnecessary drama while maintaining good relationships with all parties. Chapter 12. The Family Dynamics Decoder. Family relationships are often the most emotionally charged interactions we navigate because they involve our deepest attachments, longest histories, and most ingrained patterns. The people who raised us, grew up with us, or share our genetic makeup know exactly which buttons to push and often feel entitled to push them. Mastering emotional control within family systems requires understanding the unique dynamics that make these relationships so triggering and developing strategies specifically designed for these complex bonds. The first challenge in family relationships is that everyone operates from outdated versions of each other. Your parents might still see you as the rebellious teenager you were 20 years ago. Your siblings might relate to you based on childhood dynamics that no longer reflect who you are. You might find yourself falling into old patterns of behavior that you've outgrown in every other area of your life. This phenomenon happens because family systems resist change. Every family develops unspoken rules about who plays what role, who has what power, and how conflicts get resolved. When one person starts changing these patterns, the system pushes back to restore its familiar equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is dysfunctional. Understanding this dynamic helps you avoid taking family members' resistance personally. When your mother criticizes your life choices, she might not be commenting on your current reality so much as trying to maintain her role as the person who guides and protects you. When your sibling dismisses your opinions, they might be operating from childhood competition dynamics rather than evaluating your actual ideas. The strategy for handling family enmeshment is creating adult boundaries while maintaining loving connections. This means you can care about family members without taking responsibility for their emotions or allowing them to control your choices. You can participate in family gatherings without getting drawn into historical conflicts or feeling obligated to fix everyone's problems. Holiday gatherings and family events are particularly challenging because they force you to spend extended time with people you might not choose to be around in other circumstances. Everyone's stress levels are elevated. Alcohol might be involved, and old grievances tend to resurface. Prepare for these events by setting realistic expectations and planning your responses to predictable triggers. If Uncle Bob always makes inappropriate political comments, decide in advance that you won't engage in those debates. If your mother always comments on your appearance or life choices, prepare neutral responses that don't escalate the situation. Create exit strategies for overwhelming situations. Drive yourself to events so you can leave when necessary. Set time limits for visits. Have polite phrases ready for disengaging from problematic conversations. "I'm going to help in the kitchen," or "I need some fresh air," can get you out of tense situations without creating drama. Parenting situations test emotional regulation skills in unique ways because they combine unconditional love with daily frustrations and the enormous responsibility of shaping another human being. Children and teenagers are naturally egocentric and often lack the emotional regulation skills you're trying to model. They can be demanding, ungrateful, and deliberately provocative, all while being completely dependent on your care and guidance. The key insight for parenting with emotional control is that your children's behavior is usually about their developmental stage and individual temperament, not about your parenting competence or their opinion of you. Toddlers have tantrums because their emotional regulation systems are still developing. Teenagers push boundaries because they're neurologically programmed to seek independence, even when they lack the skills to handle it responsibly. When your child is having a meltdown or being defiant, remember that they need you to be the emotionally regulated adult in the situation. If you react with anger or frustration, you're adding to the emotional chaos rather than providing the stability they need to learn regulation skills themselves. Use the same pause protocol with your children that you use in other relationships, but adapt it for the parenting context. Take deep breaths, lower your voice, and remind yourself that this is a teaching moment rather than a personal attack. Ask yourself what your child needs in this moment rather than what they deserve as punishment for their behavior. Dealing with aging parents presents different emotional challenges as the power dynamics shift and you watch people you've always seen as strong and capable become vulnerable and dependent. This transition can trigger grief, resentment, and fear as you confront your own mortality and the reality that your parents are no longer the people who can protect and guide you. The strategy here is accepting the role reversal while honoring the relationship's history. Your parents might need your care and decision-making support, but they still deserve respect for their autonomy and dignity. You can be helpful without being controlling, supportive without being condescending. When elderly parents become difficult, remember that they're often dealing with loss of independence, physical pain, cognitive changes, or fear about their future. Their irritability or resistance to help might be more about grieving their losses than about your specific suggestions or assistance. Extended family drama, including divorced parents, stepfamilies, and in-laws, creates complex webs of competing loyalties and conflicting expectations. You might find yourself caught between people you care about, who are in conflict with each other, or dealing with family members by marriage who have different values and communication styles than you're used to. The principle here is that you cannot fix other people's relationships or resolve conflicts that existed before you arrived on the scene. Don't try to mediate between divorced parents, reform difficult in-laws, or create harmony in blended families. Focus on maintaining your own relationships with each person individually, rather than trying to manage the larger family system. Set clear boundaries about what you will and won't discuss with different family members. You don't have to listen to complaints about other family members or carry messages between people who aren't speaking to each other. That sounds like something you should discuss with them directly. Becomes a standard response to triangulation attempts. Chapter 13. The Social Mastery System. Social situations outside of work and family present their own unique challenges for emotional regulation. Whether you're dealing with strangers in public spaces, acquaintances at social events, or service providers in commercial transactions, these interactions test your ability to maintain composure when you have no ongoing relationship to protect and limited information about the other person's motivations or constraints. The first principle of social mastery is recognizing that most people's behavior in public reflects their internal state rather than their opinion of you. The rude cashier might be dealing with a personal crisis, working a double shift, or being pressured by management to process customers faster. The aggressive driver might be rushing to a medical emergency, dealing with severe stress, or struggling with road rage as a symptom of deeper emotional problems. This understanding helps you depersonalize public rudeness and inconsiderate behavior. When someone cuts in line, speaks dismissively to you, or seems unreasonably demanding, your first assumption should be that their behavior says more about their day, their personality, or their circumstances than about your worthiness of respect. Customer service interactions are particularly testing because they often involve problems, frustrations, and power imbalances. You might be dealing with a company's mistake, trying to get help with a complicated issue, or seeking resolution for something that's causing you inconvenience or expense. The person helping you might have limited authority to solve your problem, be following strict scripts or policies, or be dealing with dozens of similar complaints every day. The key to successful customer service interactions is collaborative problem-solving rather than adversarial demanding. Start conversations by acknowledging the other person's position. I know this probably isn't your fault, but I'm hoping you can help me figure out a solution. This approach makes the representative your partner in solving the problem rather than your opponent in a battle. When you encounter policies or responses that frustrate you, ask questions that help the representative think creatively rather than just following standard procedures. What would you do if you were in my position? Or Is there someone else who might have different options available? These questions invite them to go beyond their initial response without making them feel criticized. Social gatherings, networking events, and parties create different challenges because they involve managing multiple relationships simultaneously, while often feeling pressure to be entertaining, impressive, or socially successful. You might encounter people who dominate conversations, others who seem uninterested in talking with you, or social dynamics that feel excluding or competitive. The strategy for social events is focusing on connection rather than impression management. Instead of worrying about how you're coming across or whether people are sufficiently impressed with you, focus on being genuinely interested in others and contributing positively to the social atmosphere. When you meet someone who seems disinterested or distracted, don't take it personally or try harder to win their attention. Some people are introverted and need time to warm up. Others might be dealing with social anxiety or be preoccupied with personal concerns. Give them space while remaining friendly and available. If you encounter someone who dominates conversations or seems to be showing off, resist the urge to compete or prove your own worth. Let them have the attention they seem to need while connecting with others who are more interested in mutual conversation. Often, the most socially successful people at events are those who help facilitate connections between others rather than trying to be the center of attention themselves. Dealing with strangers in public spaces requires quick assessments and flexible responses because you have no context for understanding their behavior or predicting their reactions. The person who's acting aggressively on public transportation might be mentally ill, under the influence of substances, dealing with a crisis, or simply having the worst day of their life. Your primary goal in these situations is safety and de-escalation rather than education or justice. You cannot teach strangers appropriate behavior, and attempting to do so often escalates conflicts unnecessarily. If someone is being rude or inappropriate, your best response is usually to disengage politely and create physical distance. When you witness conflicts between other people in public spaces, resist the urge to intervene unless someone is in immediate physical danger. Most public arguments are between people who know each other and have ongoing issues that you don't understand. Your intervention is unlikely to help and might make the situation worse. Online interactions present unique challenges because they lack the non-verbal cues and immediate consequences that usually regulate face-to-face social behavior. People often say things online that they would never say in person, and misunderstandings escalate quickly without the softening effects of tone of voice and body language. The principle for online emotional regulation is the same as for in-person interactions, but it requires extra discipline because the medium makes reactive responses so easy. Before responding to anything that triggers you online, implement an extended pause. Write your response, but don't send it immediately. Come back to it after some time has passed and see if you still want to communicate the same message in the same way. Remember that online interactions are often public and permanent. Responses that feel satisfying in the moment can damage your reputation and relationships long-term. When someone attacks you online, consider whether a response will actually improve the situation or just provide entertainment for observers. Chapter 14. The Neuroplasticity Advantage. Rewiring your brain for permanent change. Everything you've learned so far requires consistent practice to become permanent changes in how your brain operates. Your current emotional patterns exist because they've been reinforced through repetition over months, years, or decades. To replace them with new patterns requires understanding how your brain changes and how to accelerate that change process. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout your life. Every time you practice emotional regulation techniques, you're literally rewiring your brain. The neural pathways associated with reactive responses become weaker, while the pathways associated with conscious choice become stronger. This process explains why emotional control gets easier with practice, and why occasional lapses don't undo your progress. You're not just changing your behavior in the moment, you're changing the underlying brain structures that generate your emotional responses. Each time you choose pause over reaction, reframing over automatic interpretation, or detachment over emotional entanglement, you're making those choices more accessible in the future. The key factors that accelerate neuroplastic change are consistency, emotional intensity, and novelty. Your brain changes faster when you practice regularly rather than sporadically. When you're emotionally engaged with the learning process rather than going through the motions, and when you challenge yourself with new situations rather than just practicing in comfortable contexts. This understanding leads to specific strategies for accelerating your emotional mastery development. First, create daily practice routines, rather than waiting for challenging situations to test your skills. Spend time each day visualizing yourself responding calmly to triggering scenarios. This mental rehearsal strengthens the neural pathways associated with regulated responses before you need them in real situations. Second, use emotional intensity to your advantage during practice. Don't just think about staying calm. Imagine yourself feeling genuinely peaceful and composed in difficult situations. The stronger the emotional component of your practice, the more effectively you're rewiring your brain. Third, progressively challenge yourself with more difficult scenarios as your skills improve. If you've mastered staying calm with mildly annoying people, intentionally practice with more challenging personalities. If you can regulate your emotions in low-stakes situations, gradually apply your skills in higher-pressure contexts. The science of habit formation reveals why some people successfully change their emotional patterns while others remain stuck despite good intentions. Habits exist in neurological loops consisting of a cue, a routine, and a reward. To change emotional habits, you need to identify the cues that trigger reactive responses, develop new routines for handling those cues, and ensure that the new routines provide satisfying rewards. For example, if criticism from your boss is a cue that triggers defensive anger, you need to recognize that cue as early as possible and replace your defensive routine with a regulated response routine. The reward needs to be something you value more than the temporary satisfaction of defending yourself, such as maintaining your professional reputation or feeling proud of your self-control. The most effective way to establish new emotional habits is through what researchers call implementation intentions. Instead of general goals like, "I want to stay calm," create specific if-then plans. If my coworker interrupts me in a meeting, then I will take a deep breath and wait for them to finish before responding. These specific plans help your brain automatically choose regulated responses instead of having to make conscious decisions in triggering moments. Understanding the role of stress in neuroplasticity helps explain why emotional regulation skills seem to disappear during high-pressure periods. Chronic stress floods your brain with cortisol, which impairs the functioning of your prefrontal cortex and makes your amygdala more reactive. This means you need to manage your overall stress levels to maintain access to your emotional regulation skills. Stress management for neuroplastic optimization includes physical practices like regular exercise, adequate sleep, and proper nutrition. But it also includes mental practices like meditation, mindfulness, and regular relaxation. These practices don't just feel good in the moment. They create the optimal brain conditions for continued emotional growth. The compound effect of neuroplastic change means that your efforts build on each other over time. Early progress might feel slow because you're working against well-established patterns, but as new pathways strengthen, change accelerates. People who stick with emotional regulation practice often report breakthrough moments when skills that felt forced and artificial suddenly become natural and effortless. This understanding helps you maintain motivation during the inevitable plateaus and setbacks that occur during any learning process. Temporary lapses don't mean you're not making progress. They mean you're still in the process of rewiring deeply ingrained patterns. Each time you notice a reactive response and consciously choose a regulated alternative, you're strengthening your new patterns regardless of whether you feel like you're improving. The social dimension of neuroplasticity reveals why your relationships and environment significantly impact your emotional development. Your brain is constantly adapting to the social contexts you spend time in. If you're surrounded by highly reactive people, your brain adapts by becoming more reactive. If you spend time with emotionally regulated people, your brain adapts by developing greater regulation capacity. This means that part of your emotional mastery strategy should include consciously choosing environments and relationships that support your growth. Seek out people who model the emotional skills you want to develop. Limit time with people who consistently trigger your reactive patterns. Create physical environments that support calmness and focus rather than stress and distraction. Chapter 15. Living as an emotionally unshakable person. When you've mastered the principles and techniques in this system, you don't just handle difficult people better, you become a fundamentally different person. You develop what I call emotional unshakability, a deep inner stability that remains constant regardless of external circumstances. This isn't emotional numbness or disconnection. It's the ability to feel deeply while maintaining your center, to care without being controlled, and to engage fully with life, while remaining free from the emotional chaos that dominates most people's experience. Emotionally unshakable people have certain characteristics that distinguish them from those who are still at the mercy of their reactivity. They have genuine confidence that comes from knowing they can handle whatever situations arise. This confidence isn't based on external achievements or other people's approval. It comes from proven experience managing their own emotional state under pressure. They display consistent emotional responses across different contexts. They don't have a work personality, a family personality, and a social personality that are dramatically different from each other. Their emotional regulation skills create a stable sense of self that shows up similarly in various situations and relationships. They become naturally attractive to others, not because they're trying to impress anyone, but because their emotional stability creates a sense of safety and calm that people find appealing. Others seek them out during crises, value their opinions, and enjoy spending time with them because they don't add emotional drama or reactivity to situations. The transformation to emotional unshakability happens gradually as you integrate these skills into your identity rather than just your behavior. At first, you consciously apply techniques when you remember to and when situations seem to warrant them. You pause before reacting because you've learned that's a good strategy, not because pausing feels natural. As your practice deepens, these techniques become more automatic. You find yourself naturally taking deep breaths when you feel stressed, reframing challenging situations without conscious effort, and maintaining perspective during conflicts without having to remind yourself to do so. At the mastery level, emotional regulation becomes part of who you are, rather than something you do. You don't stay calm because you're using a technique. You stay calm because emotional stability is now your natural state. You don't reframe negative situations because you've learned that's helpful. You automatically see situations from multiple perspectives because your mind has been trained to think that way. This identity-level change affects every area of your life in profound ways. Your relationships improve dramatically because you're no longer contributing to emotional escalation and drama. You become a calming influence that helps others regulate their own emotions just by being present. Your professional success accelerates because you're seen as someone who can handle responsibility, pressure, and leadership challenges. You make better decisions because your thinking isn't clouded by emotional reactivity. You communicate more effectively because you're focused on understanding and problem-solving rather than defending and attacking. Your physical health improves because you're no longer subjecting your body to the chronic stress hormones that come from frequent emotional activation. Your sleep improves, your digestion improves, and your immune system functions better because your nervous system spends more time in rest and repair mode rather than fight or flight mode. Your mental clarity increases because you're not wasting mental energy on rumination, resentment, and emotional processing. You have more cognitive resources available for creativity, learning, and strategic thinking because you're not constantly managing internal emotional turmoil. Perhaps most importantly, you develop a deep sense of personal freedom. You realize that no one can make you feel anything without your permission. No situation can force you into emotional reactivity unless you choose to react. No person can control your inner experience unless you give them that power. This freedom isn't loneliness or disconnection. You can still love deeply, feel passionate about causes, and experience the full range of human emotions. The difference is that you experience emotions consciously rather than being overwhelmed by them. You choose your emotional responses rather than having them chosen for you by circumstances and other people's behavior. Living as an emotionally unshakable person means you've become the author of your own emotional experience rather than a victim of external circumstances. You've developed the ability to maintain your inner peace regardless of the chaos around you. You've learned to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be chosen for. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean you'll never feel angry or bothered by anyone ever again. It means that when you do experience these emotions, they don't control you. They pass through you without taking up permanent residence. They inform you without overwhelming you. They motivate you without consuming you. The journey to emotional mastery is one of the most worthwhile investments you can make in yourself because it affects every single day of your life and every relationship you have. It's a gift you give not only to yourself but to everyone whose life you touch. When you're no longer adding reactivity and drama to the world, you become part of the solution to humanity's emotional chaos rather than part of the problem. Most people will live their entire lives at the mercy of their emotional reactions, triggered by every difficult person they encounter, stressed by circumstances they cannot control, and limited by the emotional patterns they developed in childhood. But you don't have to be most people. You have the knowledge and techniques to become emotionally unshakable. The only question is whether you'll commit to the practice required to make this transformation real. The choice is yours, and it's available to you right now. You can continue being bothered by difficult people, or you can become someone who is never bothered by anyone. You can remain reactive, or you can become responsive. You can stay emotionally dependent, or you can become emotionally free. Your future self is waiting for you to make this choice. And once you do, and once you begin this practice in earnest, you'll wonder how you ever lived any other way.